Speaker Pangilinan, if you can lead us in prayer this morning.
Fanogi, por favor. Ina ni Tatay Lahinya, Espiritu Santo. Diyos Tata, manggayam gwini gi intero mundo pago para binatan sa un panuyam itsalan iminaulik igwinayja janin inagugufli. Anin tsuli estinatalan, siguro siyempre na intatiji ifinanagwinilay mo ha Jesus dani afanuyam kay manuman mangwayja sinanonya as Maria. Toduham ni manggagi gwini na piso pago. Manggagyang gwini sa inufresin maisaham para bintat tiji ikurason mami para afa tay mano ni sinya inspia tana mas maulik itanota jatara fan siguro na ta spia jata kubri ininisidad itaw-tawta. Dear Lord, thank you very much for allowing us to be present on this earth on this wonderful day. We ask that you continue to show us the way of inafamolik, where we can come together to make things better for each and every single one that calls Guam home and that is on this earth by your good grace. We ask that you show us the teachings of your Son, Jesus Christ, the love of his mother Mary, and that we will do the same in exhibiting in our work today our love for our people. This we ask through the good grace and the intercession of Our Lady. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much. Just to start off with the Inifresi, could I ask Senator Samabini to lead it? Takluki Kinesoko in Mastakulum Gi Corazonho, Jani Maspigo Nyam Shinyaho, who freshen Maisajo, Parabai who protehi, Zahu defendi, Ihenengi, Ikutura, Lenguahi, Iairi, Ihanum Jani Tanu Chamor, near and Shafko Direcho, Minister Stata, Esti who fitna, Kihilo Diblia. Thank you, Senator. Can I ask Senator Tina Muñoz-Barnes if you can lead us in Fanogi Chamorro and Senator Frank Blush Jr. in the singing of the national anthem.
Fanogi Chamorro, Purita Nota, Canta Matunanya Ito Ika. Para y honra, para y gloria, aviva y isla para. Para y honra, para y
Thank you very much. Ask the clerk to please take roll call.
Senator Tom Ada. Senator Tony Ada. Senator Blas. Vice Speaker Cruz. Senator Duenas. Senator Guthertz. Senator Mabini. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Palacios. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Silva Tyron. Speaker Wampet.
Thank you.
Senator Yamashita. Madam Speaker, wish to report there is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Call for the approval of the Legislative Journal. I recognize the Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I first move that we excuse Senator Tyrone. Oh, jeez.
Without any objections, ordered.
And under approval of the Legislative Journal, I move that we approve the Legislative Journal dated 7/9/12 through 8/7/12, subject to correction.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
Madam Speaker, there are communications and petitions, and I move that these be appended to today's session journal,
No objections, ordered.
as well as messages from Imagalahan Guahan. I move that they also be appended to today's session journal,
No objections, ordered.
and as well as reports of standing committees. Madam Speaker, I move for the same.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
Madam Speaker, there are no reports of select committees, so on item 12, I call for the introduction and first reading of bills and resolutions. Bill number 489 through 31 COR to 506-31 COR, as well as resolutions 468-31 COR to resolution 46-31 COR, and certificate 158-31 COR all be given its first reading.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
My first motion, Madam Speaker, is any, it's not? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
say-
My first motion, Madam Speaker, is that any resolution that's commendatory or congratulatory in nature that's introduced for the duration of this budget session be accepted and adopted, and that the clerk work with the sponsors in the preparation of these documents, and that all senators be co-sponsors.
No objections, ordered.
Madam Speaker, under legislative concurrence from the Committee on Guam Military Buildup and Homeland Security on the appointment of Mr. Pedro A. Leon Guerrero to serve as Director of Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency with Senator Guthertz Committee's recommendation to confirm, I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
And from the Committee on Appropriations, Taxation, Public Debt, Banking, Insurance, Retirement, and Land on the appointment of Mr. David J. Matanani to serve as a member of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission with Senator Ben's committee's recommendation to confirm, I move that that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
As well as from the Committee on Health and Human Services, Senior Citizens, Economic Development, and Election Reform on the appointment of Dr. Joan Gill to serve as a member of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners with Senator Rodriguez's committee's recommendation to confirm, I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
And from the Vice Speaker's Committee on Youth, Cultural Affairs, Procurement, General Government Operations, and Public Broadcasting on the appointment of Mr. Byron Duenas to serve as a member of the Guam Council on Arts and Humanities Agency Board of Directors with Vice Speaker Cruz's committee's recommendation to confirm, I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
And I'll move item 5, Madam Speaker, from my committee after we do the public hearing. And so at this time, I have no other motions before us other than a motion to resolve in the Committee of the Whole.
Your last one, the last
The
one.
what? No, I'm having a public hearing this Thursday on this,
Oh,
on
okay.
item 5.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is pending the committee report, but. So Madam Speaker, can I move to resolve us then in the Committee of the Whole?
Yes.
Then having no other motions or legislative concurrences or any other business other than the budget at this time, I move that we resolve in the Committee of the Whole with Speaker Ben as the chairperson of the Committee of the Whole for the purposes of entertaining Bill number 426-31.
What, so?
And this is An act making appropriations for the operations of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government of Guam for fiscal year ending September 30, 2013, making other appropriations and establishing miscellaneous and administrative provisions, and this is as substituted by the Committee on Appropriations, Taxation, Public Debt, Banking, Insurance, Retirement, and Land.
Can we take a brief recess?
Madam Speaker, let me just withdraw that motion to resolve in the Committee of the Whole, and then notwithstanding the House rules, we proceed to the voting file to vote on these confirmations.
Thank you very much. Hearing no objections, so ordered. The clerk on the first appointment.
You can read the first one.
The first one.
On the appointment of Mr. Pedro A. Leon Guerrero to serve as Director of Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency.
All those in favor of,
No, roll call.
yes, I'm sorry. I was going to ask, I was going to count the hands. Yes,
Senator
thank you.
Tom Ada. Senator Tony Ada. Senator Frank Blas. Vice Speaker Cruz. Aye. Senator Dueñas. Senator Guthertz. Senator Mabini. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Palacios. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Silva Tyron. Speaker Wampet.
Okay.
Senator Yamashita. Senator Tom Ada.
On the confirmation of Mr. Pedro A. Leon Guerrero to serve as the Director of Customs Quarantine Agency, there are 14 yea votes and 1 excused absence. Mr. Pedro Leon Guerrero is duly confirmed by this body. Make sure you put down the excuse. On the appointment of Mr. David J. Mantanani to serve as a member of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, all in favor, please raise your hand. Mr. David J. Mantanani is duly confirmed by this body, unanimously confirmed. On the appointment of Dr. Joan Gill to serve as a member of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, all in favor, please raise your hand. Dr. Joan Gill is duly confirmed by this body, received unanimous support. On the appointment of Mr. Brian Dueñas to serve as member of the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency, all in favor, please raise your hand. Mr. Brian Dueñas is duly confirmed by this body. Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we revert back to the second reading file, and I renew my motion to resolve in the Committee of the Whole with Speaker Ben, the chairperson of this Committee of the Whole.
Hearing objections, order. So, okay, so that's it.
The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, we're in the Committee of the Whole to address the request of the administration in the Governor's executive budget request for the fiscal year FY 2013. We have heard many discussions with regards to what to expect in the budget and what we are facing with regards to the challenges that this government is facing in terms of providing services and in a lot of instances really focusing on ensuring that this government meets its obligation to the general public, first and foremost to the taxpayers who lend this government money in order to function, and then expect that that money that they lend to us in the form of overpayments of income tax is returned to them in a timely manner. And this body, along with the governor, has struggled with a way to do that. And this body, in cooperation with the governor, has moved forward on embarking on a series of financing that money we want to return to the taxpayer in order to return their tax refunds and then move forward in terms of returning their refunds to them. And that has been the subject of many discussions between the administration and this legislative body, and that is also continues to be the focus of this bill. The committee has substituted the bill based upon input received during the meetings that were held, meetings with the Bureau of Budget and Management and the governor's financial team, meetings held by the Special Accounting Service Group, chartered by statute in a bill that was introduced by, and now public law introduced by Senator Roy Respicio, along with the Special Economic Service Group, to give us a more objective and what I call dispassionate view with regards to the financial condition of the government and recommendations as the legislature and the administration move forward in addressing this once-a-year process of the provision and of the resources needed through the budget acts. The committee will operate on pretty much the same rules as we had last year. And last year we went through a section by section of the bill. We allowed for 3 rounds of questioning per section so that members can voice their general comments as well as ask specific questions for any of the items contained in the bill. When the committee and its staff are not able to provide you with the information that you require, the committee will entertain then a motion to bring in the subject matter experts, the administration representatives, who may respond then to the specific questions you have. We placed a call to the administration this weekend asking them that their individual financial team and the governor's representative on this executive budget be on standby should we need to call them in. We're asking that because the budget, of course, is pretty voluminous, that we limit 5 minutes per senator per round. So basically, we're looking at 15 minutes so that you may ask then. We will go section by section of the bill, and the motions that will be allowed in this will be a motion to amend, delete, and add. We also wanted to give you the information that the committee has at its disposal. The committee report itself has been and should have been posted at this time already, so I know a lot of you have your laptops, and so it was quite a bit of a number of pages. So we've posted it online at senbenp.com under the OFB pull down. So we if it's not up there yet, it's definitely will be up there within the next 30 minutes or so. We've started up. It is up there already. So the senbenp.com under the OFB pull down tab menu. So you'll find a committee report there. You'll find a copy of the bill, but you also have a hard copy of the bill before you. We also have each of the individual detailed budget requests submitted by the administration for all the departments and agencies at that same website. So if we're looking and going through the bill and you see at Rev and Tax that they have contractual, and you want to know what they had for contractual last year, we have one set of hard copy here, but if you go to the website, you can also pull out that budget, and that will give you that detail as you follow the link to that portion of the budget. So we have that information available on the website and a hard copy here, and the staff is also here to kind of help you navigate finding that information. The budget itself and the way it looks is In the first part, of course, is the revenue, as always, and then which is composed of the general fund, special funds. It also, of course, details the reductions in those revenues for the debt service that we have for every single fiscal year for all of our obligations, whether they be bond payments, whether they be line of credit, whether they be tax credit reserved. We have detailed that in the front section. If it's a tax credit, it reduces the available revenue for appropriation because that basically is an advance appropriation. So all of that is contained in section 1 of the budget bill. Then we move forward in terms of the different departments and agencies through chapter 2, basically through about chapter 11 or somewhere in that chapter 13. And then we have the administrative provisions, and then we have the miscellaneous appropriations provisions as well. We ask that if you're looking at the appropriation level and you want to add an appropriation, that a corresponding decrease in the appropriation appearing on the other budget, in the other sections of the budget, be identified, so that we try to keep the budget as balanced as possible. The budget is balanced. It definitely is not a deficit spending budget. That the proposal before you does not allow for deficit spending, and so. So the way we have the budget is we outline the governor's request in chapter 2 through the different departments and agencies, and then you will see two columns on that on the budget side. You'll have the BBMR and then a FY13 request. The BBMR tab you'll see is asterisks, so that is what we have through the SES, SAS meetings, identified as the current expected expenditures of those departments and agencies at the end of the fiscal year. And that number is based upon 10 months of actual expenditures to date, plus what BBMR expects they will project to be expended over the next 2 months. So that'll be kind of like their allotment schedule. So that gives you an idea of what that agency has available for resources this year and what it's spent this year, and then the FY13 is what the governor has requested to be allocated to those departments and agencies. We move to a second part of the bill in which the bill then reduces the expenditure level that the governor is requesting for FY13, so that the reduction results in about 8 million, in a total of $14 million reduction in the FY13 request, and that reduction is then appropriated to the income tax refund payment account to pay for prior year income tax refunds. So in this budget, the governor's executive branches receive a reduction. The governor determines that reduction in terms of aggregate numbers. So he is then asked or tasked with reducing that FY13 request by about $10 million. So his FY13 he's asked to reduce his request by $10 million, and that goes to pay prior year refunds. The legislature also gets a reduction, and the reduction of around the same percentage as the governor. Every reduction is between 5 to 6%. So the legislature gets a reduction of about 5%, and that reduction is then also appropriated to the income tax refunds. The other allocated appropriations from the governor also, so the judiciary also gets a reduction. Now, the reason why we put the BBMR run rate there, so that you'll see that even if that there is room for those reductions in there. And so we show you what they're spending today, and we are allowing the governor flexibility on where he takes those reductions from, and he can detail that. So that is the general structure of the budget, the general approach that this committee has taken with regards to the budget. The Special Economic Service Group is charged with, by statute, making a recommendation on the revenues for the fiscal year to the legislature and the governor. And the Special Economic Service Group, in its meeting on Friday, voted to recommend that the governor's revenue projections be adopted as the basis for the FY 2013 fiscal year budget. So the budget you have reflects that revenue number that was sent down by the governor with regards to the total revenue that will be available to meet the operational needs of this government. And so with that, I'm going to open up just for general comments, for one round of general comments, and then we'll proceed with Chapter 1, which is the revenues. So, Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Speaker Ben, and certainly thank you for the inclusive discussions and conversations that have gotten us to this point. Speaker Ben, my question is really very general, and that is, as we proceed from section to section, will we be able to go back to a previous section?
Yes, if we bookmark that section and we need to answer it, or you're making a change and it affects a previous section, we'll have to go back to that.
Or even if we think of something later on?
Or you missed something?
Yeah, I missed something.
Yes,
Can we
yes.
go? Okay, thank you very much.
We'll allow that. Okay. Senator Respicio, and then Vice Speaker Cruz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I attended your SES meetings, and there was something that was very disconcerting at last Friday's meeting, and maybe it was just me because I'm so old school. I guess I was trained in the old days of line item budgets, and I was shocked at the very nonchalant way in which the SES committee accepted the statement by the public auditor that last year $20 million that was not appropriated was transferred and expended. It started with my discussion on how much was transferred for customs and quarantine, and she just kind of said, well, you know, last year she reported in her audit that there was $20 million of unappropriated funds that were expended. If they can spend $20 million that we did not appropriate, then why are we spending this time this week to go through this budget? If they can just go through and spend money that was not appropriated, I thought that was the function of the legislature, to make a determination that this is what we want to have the meager resources of the government spent on. To just decide that you're going to spend an additional $20 million confused me. Maybe I took civics before many of the people in here were born, so maybe someone might enlighten me that maybe there's the civics of the 21st century that I'm not aware of.
Yes, thank you very much. If I could just maybe recount the discussion of the, as you referred to in the SES for the benefit of the members here. The public auditor had discussed two things. One was, of course, as you mentioned, one was the unbudgeted expenditures. And the unbudgeted expenditures were things like income tax refund, interest payments. When we set up the provision, we know that when you don't pay the refund, you have interest. And so the provision in a lot of the past years did not provide for the interest because we're late in paying. So those are the unbudgeted items. Another example of an unbudgeted item is that when we started accepting credit cards, there's a fee attached to the using of the the credit cards when people use that, and that became an unbudgeted item. And as people got used to paying with fees, there's a reduction in the revenue. We're saying that somebody who owes $100, when we project the revenue, we project collecting 100, but if he pays with a credit card, we only get 98 because there's $2 fee attached to the payment of the transaction fee on the credit card. The legislature has fixed that. I think in the last budget we appropriated and recognized that fee associated with the transactions of using credit cards. Vice Speaker Cruz was referring to, for example, the customs. I think what the public auditor was referring there is that they use the general fund cash because the customs, the appropriation authority is there. So we appropriated, for example, for customs, $7 million to run their operations. What was not evident to the legislature was that when they give us that $7 million number, that number is the number that is the gross number of the customs and quarantine user fee. Now, when we appropriated the operational expense of customs, we appropriated the entire 7. What was happening is that the collection of the customs user fees done by the airport with the airlines, because that's attached to the ticket of the passenger. And so when they collect that and they get 7 million, the airport charges customs rent for their presence at the airport facility. So they collect a total of 7 million for the passenger facilities charge. Then they take 3 million off the top because that's how much rent they charge customs. And then they give the 4 million in cash collections to the general fund or to the administration for accounting to support then the appropriation of 7 million for operations. But there's only 4 million of cash collected. And so what the administration has been doing is they've been making up that difference in the cash from the general fund. And so that was the reference to that issue. Now, I was involved in the implementation of the passenger facilities charge to help customs generate the revenues needed to support its operation. Senator Mark Charfris at that time was in office, and he and I, along with the airport attorney at that time, Oliver Redalu, actually worked out the arrangement and the authority to grant the airport the right to charge that passenger's facilities charge so that we can then recoup the cost of providing the customs inspection services. And the MOU and the authority really is supposed to be a break-even. So if customs inspection services are costing $5 million, then that fee should be set so that it's 5 million, generates 5 million. If we collect more than 5 million because we have a greater number of arrivals, we're actually supposed to return the excess over the 5 million back to the airlines. And that has happened once. But on the converse of that, the authority also says that if we're spending 5 million and we only collect 4, then we recoup that and raise the rates the next time to recoup that million. Well, we've never raised the rates to recoup that million. And the increase in the customs operating costs really over the last 3 years has been the 10% increase to law enforcement officers. That's what has impacted most the operating expense of customs. And so when we implemented that, there was no corresponding increase in the passengers' facilities charge. And then the rent. We never recognized the rent and deducted the rent. Now we have to recognize that because it's pretty much very clear. So that's a long-winded history of of the explanation of that, Mr. Vice Speaker.
I understand that, but why aren't we including that in here? And I note in the budget between page 104 and 107, you have for almost every government agency your breakdown pages, you put it, where you have 12 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a schedule like that for Customs and Quarantine saying that there's $3 million worth of rental. For the page before it, on the medical examiner, you have an amount. And for Chamorro Affairs, you have that they're paying $182,000 for their rent. But for $3 million, we're not going to have any acknowledgement of that?
Yes, we actually did that this year. We took it off the revenue in the beginning in Section 1. So you see in Section 1 under Customs and Quarantine, I forgot the proper title, Customs and Quarantine Special Fund, you'll see that the revenue is recognized at $9 million, and then we back out $3 million for rent. You'll see that on the revenue side. In page 4, right there, and it's up. We've actually recognized that now here. You'll see that rent paid to the airport. And that was basically, I think, because of the questions and the discussions that occurred and the questions you'd asked during the SES meetings.
Thank you, because I was just a little bothered when she was saying that there's $20 million that we didn't address in here that somehow they can expend.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that as we've noticed them, we've corrected it, and in the meantime, it would seem to me that if there's no authority to spend that money, you don't pay it, and you come back here and you ask for permission to do it. I don't see how you can just say, I need to pay the rent, so I'll pay the rent, and if it's not there, or if I have to pay the bank charge, I'll pay the bank charge, but I'm not. We finally have appropriated, so there should have been an appropriation at the beginning.
Yes.
And I don't think I'd ever want to hear another at SES that we're spending, I mean, the executive is spending $20 million that was not appropriated by this body. Otherwise, it just moots everything that we're doing here.
I agree with you, Mr. Vice Speaker. Okay. All right. Yes. Senator Dueñas, I saw your hand.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to basically just thank you and the committee's work and preparation for this bill and the budget. I got to say, in your opening, it was refreshing and nice to hear that we are tracking with this budget being lower than the request. And I know, Mr. Speaker, your basic instructions were that it will be up to the administration, the executive branch, to decide where to correspond. And so as we go, I will be looking closely. I just wanted to ask one basic question, Mr. Chairman. So would your view of this be as allowing for the adopted level as presented by the executive branch? Would it then be akin to a 5 to 6% reserve within the budget, or would it be more like it has to be identified as a corresponding reduction in areas before we pass the budget?
I'm sorry.
So I'm saying that if the adopted level
right.
were as you said in correspondence with the or to correspond with the requested level, would it be akin to a 5 to 6% reserve, or will we be identifying or just passing on for the chief executive to identify where the cuts would be?
Your statement is correct on the back part.
Okay.
It is the chief executive is to identify where he would cut. So it's not a reserve. It's a de-appropriation of the approximately $10 million from the executive appropriation level based upon the adopted revenues, and that money is de-appropriated, so it's not a reserve. It's a de-appropriation and sent over to the income tax payment.
Okay, Mr. Chair, and I thank you for that clarification, because then even though we will be, of course, going through in detail, we will not find that in the budget substitute bill.
No, it is. It's in page 113. 137 is where that number of what that amount is. But it's not a, it's not a agency or object class detail with regards to where he should cut.
Okay, and that's what I wanted
Yes.
to make sure it was clear, Mr. Chair, so that we won't really, if we come to the conclusion in the end that, wow, we didn't find that number somewhere in there, it's because it's being allowed for the executive branch to make that decision, and it won't be reflected in any detailed budget, but the number will show up within a section of this particular substitute bill.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That information is very valuable, and I look forward to the correspondence and discussion.
Okay. Senator Yamashita? No.
Speaker Ben, the substitute bill 426-31 is not yet uploaded. It's not on the website yet.
Okay.
So maybe we.
Okay.
Oh, is that the legislative? Oh, I'm sorry. He told.
Oh,
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, it may have not been on our website, but it should.
Oh, the legislative. Okay.
It's on the legislative. Yeah. The committee report is on our website. The substitute bill is on the legislature's website. Yeah. Okay. It should be up, if it's not up, it should be up within half hour, so, okay. All right. We'll go ahead then and begin with page 1, which is the Chapter 1. The short title, Act shall be known as the General Appropriation Act of 2013. Any comments or questions on that? If none. Section 2 are the estimated revenues for FY13. And Roman numeral 1 under Section 2 are the general fund revenues. The total general fund revenue is $689,105,22. And then the priority that's placed with the collection of that revenue is, as we've placed here, is that the refunds. So both the administration have requested that $100 million of the $689 in total general fund revenue be taken off the top and be set aside to pay for the income tax refunds due for people filing their refunds for tax calendar year 2012. So that is the amount that is being reserved based upon the request of the administration, which then leaves a net revenue available. Okay, Senator Blas, I see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, what were the provisions for tax refund payments, the amounts that we had set aside for the last 2 fiscal years? Is this a decrease from?
Yes, it is. The amount last year was 105.
Was 105 or 112, something like that?
And then the year before was it 110? It was over this amount as well. Yeah, it might have been, yeah, I want to say 110 or 112. Now, we specifically asked about this question, the Director of Revenue and Tax, and one of the things that they mentioned was that based upon their historic analysis, that they came out with 3 different amounts, 100, 109, and I think like a 112. And so they said that this is the Director of Revenue and Taxation, BBMR, in DOA, and their explanation on adopting the 100 was that because the bonds have paid a lot of the past due refunds and prior year refunds, that there may be, they had decided to go a little bit more, I guess it would be liberal, right, rather than conservative in terms of taking a higher number, a lower number versus a higher number. So they decided to adopt, based upon a vote, their vote, the $100 million number. And so that is one of the reasons why we were concerned, and when we approached the budget, we looked at Okay, so we're only reserving for the calendar year FY12. Calendar year 12, and that's why when we looked at the budget, we decided to try and find additional resources to place into refunds, and that's when we came up with the approach of reducing the FY13 request and putting that reduction into the refunds, so that the total amount provided for refunds in this budget bill, with the reduction identified in the bill of the FY13 request, will be an additional $14 million. So the total amount will be $114 million available, 100 from the request for provisions, and $14 million from the reductions in the request.
Is there a formula that is going to be utilized, recognizing, you're looking at the figures here, and this is projected revenue and basically a projected provision based on revenue, but is there going to be a formula, or is there a discussion with regards to formulas that will enable us and help us to meet that $100 million provision?
I have here the report. We'll make, I don't know if we have this in the website, but I can make a copy of this for the body, which is the Department of Revenue and Taxation estimated provision for refunds, and this was revised 7/24/12, and it was the 3 different scenarios.
Yeah,
So
can I get a copy of that?
Yes,
sir?
yes, I'll make
And
a-
then, based on that, can we bookmark that and
Sure.
come back to that? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Senator Ada?
Mr. Chairman, if we could just clarify for the record, as I was following the budget hearings last week, it was mentioned that there's still, I believe, an outstanding $35 million in tax refunds from previous to FY 2012. So, so it seems that we're still short then about 20 million then in liquidating what's outstanding. Is that correct?
Yeah. The number available is there's a DOA liability estimate and a Department of Revenue and Taxation liability estimate. We usually track the Department of Revenue and Taxation a little bit closer. The estimated revenue, outstanding liability by Department of Revenue and Taxation is about $30 million. So 36 was a DOA number. We're more comfortable with the 30 million. $14 million should be paid this week, according to the governor, and really we should be paying $17 million. But regardless, we have a commitment to pay 14. So that reduces the prior year obligation to about $16 million. Again, one of the approaches was the provision does not address that number, so that's one of the approaches we did, was to reduce the FY13 request. And so Section 2714 also, that Senator and Vice Speaker Cruz had allocated an additional $4 million. So if that Section 2714 is used to pay, so that takes us down to 12 million. So now we have the reduction in requested allocation for the departments and agencies. That gives us an additional 14 million. So really, we will have from the payment this week, the 2718 reservation that was put in the budget of 4 million, plus the 14 million that is identified in this budget, that should liquidate all prior year obligations. In addition, there's still $10 million in income tax refunds of unclaimed checks at DOA. That means these checks were cut, they were mailed, they were returned, and the taxpayers have not come forward to claim them. And so checks usually get stale dated 6 months after issue. So I've asked the administration during our SES meeting to expend all efforts to contact these individuals that are owed this 10 million. And when they expend those efforts and they're not, then we can take that money once again, and when the date is stale dated, take that and apply it to an A status findable taxpayer. So we could conceivably have additional money out of that 10 million that's there. So that's the history of what has transpired with regards to the outstanding. So really, we should be starting the next fiscal year with almost zero liability for prior year, with the exception of the problem refunds and additional requirement for the taxpayer to come in and provide information. So
Thank you for that good explanation.
thank you, Sijasmasi. Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, that discussion kind of begs the question then, if we're going to be current with the tax refund reserves, which we all believe that we will be, then what is the administration doing with the 15% reserve? Have you been able to get reports from the Department of Administration to see which prior obligations they've been paying? Because this 15% reserve alone for the Department of Education represents about $27–28 million that he's withheld. And so if we're collecting beyond what we projected for this current fiscal year, and with all these additional monies that are coming in by way of federal reimbursements and the medical loss ratio to catch up with the tax refund payments, could you, and I know that this has been I don't want to say contention, but this has been a struggle with your Office of Finance and Budget and the Committee on Appropriations and BBMR to try to reconcile where all this money is going. Because in this budget, you want to take GDOE back up to status quo, but it requires that they get all the money that was appropriated to them for this current fiscal year. Can you give us an update, Mr. Speaker?
Yes. During the budget hearings, we requested that's why we had asked the BBMR to give us the projected run rate, what we call the run rate for this fiscal year for the departments and agencies. And that information is contained in this budget bill. It was very clear, and the department or the Bureau of Budget Management indicated that, was specifically to DOE, for example, that they will have to release that 15% reserve, because without releasing a portion of that reserve, DOE will not be able to close this fiscal year, or will not have enough resources to meet payroll and pay expenses for the opening of the school year and to finish out the year. So there may be a little bit of an ability to not release some of that reserve, because they're also not spending some of the authority granted them. For example, the books. The books were not ordered, and there's a $2 million appropriation for the books, but since they're not ordered, so that they don't have to release that reserve, because they won't be able to order books using that authority for the next school year. They'll have another authority contained in this budget. But they will have to release the majority of that, and the same as some of the other departments and agencies. The budget is tight this fiscal year as well, and so DPW, I think, has received a release of some of the reserves, and BBMR is doing that on a case-by-case basis, and we have asked them to quantify how much they will actually be able to save with the 15% reserve at the end of the fiscal year. And then that becomes available, as you say, if it's not spent, at least the authority to then move that to other obligations.
And more specifically, if we have a budgeted item that he's not paying, and we're collecting beyond what we projected, those budgeted items he's not paying, that's an additional savings, right? And so that's why you've argued that the Hay study, for example, is a budgeted item that he suspended payment on And if that was budgeted and we're collecting beyond what we've projected, that leaves the question where that additional $9 million went in that particular instance. And so,
Yeah. In that particular instance, it was the contract that was signed for health insurance that was over and above the budget. Remember, we got a huge increase in health insurance after the budget was passed.
but wasn't that premium authorized in the bond
Yes,
proceeds?
yes, that was covered in the bond. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so total operations, the sources of then the general fund revenue, we have taxes, we have income tax. Under income tax, we have corporate tax, we have individual tax, and we have withholding tax. Corporate tax is at $115,700,007. Individual is $73,469,937. Income tax is $115 million. And then withholding taxes, interest, and penalties of $204,643,469. So that will be under the income tax. The business privilege tax is estimated at and projected to bring in $228,751,346, and then as a percentage set by statute of the total collections there, we reduce that amount by $9,150,054. This is the percentage of the business privilege tax that is automatically appropriated to the Guam Memorial Hospital as a subsidy coming out of the general fund to assist them in their operations. So that number gets reduced. Then also we have reducing the total collections available for operations of the business privilege tax, the $4,670,139, and this is for the payment of rent at the Antalan Middle School temporary facility campus at Tizan that was vacated by JFK, but is now being occupied by Antalan. So that also is reduces the availability of the business privilege tax. And then we have other taxes. These are use tax, and other taxes by the government of $3,847,425, which brings us a total taxes available then for operations other than, of course, the subsidy to GMH and the rent at Antalan of $512,591,991. Any discussion on the income tax refunds, GRT? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your committee for putting this together. Mr. Chairman, I just have a question on the on our anticipated revenues. Is there a graph that we can see on what it was versus last year and what the collections are this year? And I don't know if it's in the committee report, but I haven't.
Yeah, it is. Of the committee report. Right? It's a table. Committee report. Yeah, we'll bring it, put it up.
Okay, and if we can just
There you go.
what the difference, what the variance is between last year and what it is for I'm sorry, which is for this fiscal year, and what we're projecting for next fiscal year.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Badassi can look at that.
So the exhibit up on the screen, shows fiscal year 2010 audited revenue collections for general tax revenues, fiscal 2011 audited numbers, a revenue tracking for fiscal year 12, 10 months of actuals plus 2 months of projected, and then column D is Bill 426-31, which is what we have here. Now, there is one difference in column D compared to the budget bill, and that is that we removed the section 2718 funds at the bottom, and we put them in the special funds section. So that's why in this bill you'll see on the bottom line the gross or the net revenue collections was 595, but in the bill it's a little lower. So, but the main differences between column C and D, which would be the current tracking versus what's projected for 2013, is the biggest and most notable is the individual income tax. And you see that there's been a reduction of almost 25%. And that's primarily due to the fact that with the bond proceeds coming in and the payment of all the tax refunds, that triggered reimbursements of additional child tax credit revenues back to the government. And during this fiscal year, we've received $39 million in reimbursements for ACTC reimbursements. And those spanned all the way back from 2005 all the way through 2011 tax year filings. And so we realized that that's not going to happen again this current upcoming fiscal year 13. So there was a big reduction in the individual income tax. Corporate income tax is showing some pretty good growth, 15%. The consensus of the Special Economic Services, that was driven primarily by the fact that in general businesses had a really good year this year. They didn't raise their expenses too much, wages, and the retail sales were very high, gas sales were really high. So the committee felt comfortable that there would be some good profits achieved in the corporate sector that we would realize in corporate income tax. There was discussion about withholding being too low. We're currently tracking at 211. That's the BBMR I think it was tracking a little bit lower, but we think that fiscal 13 withholding will probably come in somewhere in the 210 to 212 area. So that is probably underestimated. We don't feel that there's going to be a lot of growth in the employment sector, but there's certainly not. We're not looking at any reductions either.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Rodriguez. Anything additional question? Oh.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's in page 164. You said
yeah. Committee report.
Oh, the committee report. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I have Senator Bloss and then Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, going back to that, isn't it true that based on our revenue tracking, for lack of a better term, and to bring back a word for the past, the anomaly that can be attributed to this is because of the I guess the tax refunds that were divvied out, or that was released, and then people spending that money. But that's a one-time. Was it prudent for us to use that as in tracking for projecting for next year?
According to BBMR, that was not factored in because the baseline they used for FY 2012 were the months of October, November, and December of 2011. And so all of those revenue numbers for those months were prior to the release of the income tax refunds in December and most recently in June. So when that anomaly was not in the base number that they used because they used the base number earlier than those economic events.
Do we have?
And that's why you will see that the decrease of the 97 that we are tracking, next year we're projecting a decrease because we are accounting at least for those additional one-time events like the ACTC reimbursements and like $300 million into the economy. So on the individual withholding,
Okay, then how do we account for the corporate increase of 11 or
the corporate
15%?
increase, as Mr. Badasi had mentioned, was we saw an increase in the economic activity because we know that that increase, and then when the corporate returns are filed, we know that they really didn't increase employment because the job numbers didn't grow. So their expenses on the payroll side remain the same. So it's going to transfer it into profit on the profit side, and then they actually have to pay taxes on the profit. So instead of sending it out to the individual by raising their salaries, having them pay more taxes, they're going to pay more taxes on the corporate side, and that's why you see an increase in the corporate growth. And then, of course, the gas prices increase. That drives up their corporate profits because I don't think their expenses really increased that much, but they certainly raised the price on us and things like that. So that's Mr. Badassi?
The discussion on the corporate profits is on page 173 of the committee report. We can put it up on the screen. Gary Hiles had some good input on why he thought that the corporate would go up.
As well. So I have Senator Blas. It's on the website. Sure. All right. Mr. Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we go through the discussion on the corporate taxes,
Yes.
and as you know, I've been doing my own investigation on the QC program. Department of Administration has responded to me and provided me with some documentation, or at least 3 pages of information. And on one of the pages, they report that total rebate authorized in 2011 was $15,498,359.00, of which $2,286,964 was credited to estimated tax, $8,837,481 was offset against tax liability, and there's the pending payment of $4,373,914. Where is that reflected, or is that to be reflected anywhere in this income? Is there I don't see any parentheses anywhere here to take out this amount of money.
I can't.
And I'm telling you that that's a huge sum, because in 2011, according to their report, $15.5 million was authorized for rebates. That's what they reported. They also sent me documentation that showed that between 2000 and 2008, they were averaging maybe about $3 million a year, because there was $23 million for those first 8 years. And the last 4 years of the Camacho administration was virtually nothing. I mean, a couple of $100,000. But last year, they've authorized $15,498,359 for rebates, and they've made some substantial already. And so I'm wondering where that is shown, and how do we account for that?
Well, I just want to say that for the record, for the Office of Finance and Budget in the committee, that information is not available to us. And it's the first time we've seen that detailed information. We get a report on the QCs granted and the abatements granted. We do get that report, but not the detail that you have there. And so, because this number is my conjecture here is because this number of the estimation and the projection is generated by Department of Revenue and Taxation, DOA, and BBMR, that because that authorization for the abatement comes out of Rev and Tax, that they're accounting for that already in their projections, because they know that that is how much they're authorizing through the QC program. So when they do their projections and they look at corporate profit, they know which of those entities have that abatement, and when they do the projections, I'm hoping that they net that out. I can't verify that they have, but I would think that the individuals at Rev and Tax, when they authorize those abatements, they already account for that in the projections.
That has been the basis of which I've been opposed to credits. And at least in the budget that you have before us, you have the core tech credit of the $4,167,000. But there's nothing like this in any of these reports, and that's 3 times the amount that you set aside here.
Yes.
So
No, and you know, we will before we conclude the discussion on the budget, that's one of the things we'll ask Rev and Tax is that you know, how do they handle that? Should corporate withholding really be, you know, 224 million, and they've already netted out the 20 million in abatements or whatever that final number is, and that's why we have 204 here. And so we will get that answer and try to get that information from Rev and Tax.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. Senator Blas.
Along with the concern from the Vice Speaker, and I think that it would help us if after we get that information we can come back and amend that to show that there was that consideration and there was, you know, for the abatement and whatnot, because I think that it is prudent and should be for us to be able to see what could have been realized, what has been rebated, and to ensure that as a result of that rebate, it does not, you know, go into or cut into what we anticipate to receive already, and as far as the corporate income tax.
Yes, I
so
agree.
I'm going to ask that as a in advance an amendment to this to the section to show. I think, like he says, we already show the tax credit for Cortec. I think that it's
Right.
we need to show the tax credit elsewhere.
Right. No, I agree with you. And, you know, it'll be the same way we're treating, for example, like the business privilege tax, you know, where we take it out to give to GMH. We know we can't give that money to Rev and Tax or any other entity because it automatically goes to GMH. Okay. All right. We'll work with that. Okay. Any other discussion? All right. I'm sorry. Senator Palacios. I saw you.
Mr. Chairman, just is the adopted revenue inclusive, of course, of the general funds and the special funds and everything else? The adopted revenue that's available for appropriation, what is the difference between this packet and the governor's submittal? I just want to know which one is greater.
The same.
Oh, the same?
Yes. The adopted revenue is the revenue sent down by the governor. And
Okay,
that's
so
what is in this bill.
Okay,
So
okay,
it's the
because
same amount.
the bill said it
Yeah.
as
It
substituted by the
It
committees.
may look a little different because when the governor sent it down, he had the section 2718, which
Okay.
is about 7 million for the pharmaceutical fund. He had that in the general fund. So the
Okay.
general fund would look like it's 7 million less. But we transferred that to a special fund because the bill that was passed by the Vice Speaker. So the special fund now will be 7 million more.
Okay.
And then when you
Actually, I'm just interested in together. I mean,
Together,
what is the
yes.
combined
Yes.
figure that we're looking for now?
it's the same one.
The same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay. We're then the federal sources, subsection B, federal income tax, section 30. Section 30 is estimated, or has been estimated to be 53,155,293, and then of that amount, we reduced that by 1,500,000 because there was an overpayment to the government of Guam, and we're paying that back. Senator Blas?
Is this our payment? Is the second of the fourth one or the third of the fourth
No,
one?
there was 4 payments. We made 3 payments.
3 already, right?
4? 4.
Because you have 2 of 4. I thought this was the third payment.
There was originally an overpayment, And we had I think a 4-payment schedule.
Right.
We made 3 payments, and then the 4th payment last year that was due was renegotiated, and the governor requested that they stretch that payment out. Rather than making a final payment, we refinanced that payment to 4 additional payments of $1,500 versus $5 million, or 6.
So how much do we owe? How much more do we owe?
We owe another 5.8 million. Less 1.5.
Okay, so that's where the 204 came because of the stretched out payments.
Yes.
Because I thought.
Yeah. So we stretched
We've
our last.
We've been paying
payment.
them every year for the last 3 years, and that's only 2. No, no.
Yes.
That's DI math, Mr. Speaker.
No, we stretched it out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Senator Barnes.
Si Diyos Masi, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity. As noted last week on the SAS meeting on the tax collection for the Section 30, the question, the inquiry I had asked was, does the administration, or did they account for all the military personnel coming to Guam on a rotational basis, whether it be 1 to 6 months, or is the Section 30 a part of those only deployed or TDY here for 6 months and above? And the reason why I bring that up, for those who of my colleagues that weren't here, I want to bring the question to the forefront because it's important to know that the notice that came back from I guess Uncle Sam was that any military personnel stationed here on Guam, whether it was 1 day or 5 months and 29 days, that the taxes earned on that TDY or that deployment here to Guam will be included in the Section 30 fund. And I guess the administration begged to differ and said it may be just based on the Marine TDY here. So I guess my question to you was, did we get an answer to that last week or earlier this morning, if that included all those who deploy and do exercises here on Guam, whether it be 1 day or up to the 6-month timeline here? Because I did note that there was a lot of activity that has come to our island, especially up in the northern area. And I know that with those rotational TDYs here, temporary duty stations here, that to the Section 30 funds.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator, we don't have anything official, but what I did was I actually went back and looked at the news story and the announcement made by the Assistant Secretary of Defense when he was here sometime in March, the news story. And the news story said that he announced that the Section 30 withholding for rotational Marines, so only for the Marines, that those Marines that will be sent here not as a duty station but on a rotational basis, that we will get Section 30 cover over for those individuals. There was no mention of any of the other rotational billets of the different branches of the service. We have asked the administration representative, both Reverend Tax, who works with Treasury, and BBMR, who works with the administration out of the front office, to see if they can get us a copy of the MOU. Our understanding is that the MOU is between the Department of Defense and the Department of the Treasury, and it's not an agreement between the government of Guam and the Department of the Treasury. And so we've requested for them to provide us a copy that says that those rotational Marines Section 30 cover over will be made to Guam. We have not received a copy. John Camacho from Reverend Tax says he has not seen a copy, and the BBMR Executive Director also said he has not seen a copy. So, but the announcement was for just the Marines. Any additional comments or questions? Senator Cruz?
I know that the SES was a little credulous when I brought this up at the meeting, but I just want to have on the record as we're discussing this, since we're now near departmental charges, right?
Yes.
On that same page. Last Friday, I introduced Bill 506, which has the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse proposed fees. And their own economic impact statement purports that they should be able to raise anywhere from 9 to 12 million. I realize that there are some people that don't believe that within the year they can implement the collections. But I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can take that into account? I see that the mental health appropriation 17 million for this year. And if they can collect even 6 of the 12 that they say they're going to have, that saves $6 million for some other part of this budget that we need to address. And I'm just wondering, how do we take that into account? I noticed that in the GFD one, we already have flame, at 73 and the 911 at 1.6, but there's nothing in the mental health one that's going to account for any amount of money that they may or could be, should be, not just may or could, should, for the last 16 years have been collecting, have not. We now have the proposed fees, and I'm just wondering, how do we take that into account, Mr. Chairman?
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. Given that that's a hard question, I'm going to take a short recess. Can we just have a short recess then? I think what we do maybe, my suggestion. Committee of the Whole is back in session. Senator Blas.
Mr. Chair, we can go back to special fund revenues. I noticed that for the environmental health fund and for the fire, life, and emergency medical emergency fund.
We were at departmental charges. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Let me just do that, and then we'll
Okay.
get right to the special funds. Okay. Just recap that. So, the Section 30, and so the immigration fees and indirect costs is 1.796226, which gives the total federal sources from Section 30 cover over at 53,451,519. Uses of money and property, 808,896. Licenses, fees, and permits amounting to 5,070,909. And then we take out 10% of that amount to give to Rev Tax for Better Public Service Fund automatically. So we reduce that amount for appropriation. So total available under license and fees for appropriation would be 4.563818. And then the departmental charges of 1,861,714, which gives us a total general fund net revenue collections of 573,277,938. And then, according to Section 22436, Chapter 22 of Title V, there's an appropriation cap placed upon the general fund revenues of 98%, of which the remaining 2% is placed in a reserve for the reduction of the deficit. So from the 573, we reduce it by 2%, 11,465,559, which brings us to the total available general fund appropriation of 561,812,379. Once again, just to remind you that this number is different from the governor's submission because of the change in the Section 2718 of 7.5 million, which was now, you'll see now in the special fund section. And so special fund will increase by 7.5, general fund will decrease by 7.5, but the total amount remains the same. So now we're in the special revenue section. Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I noticed that both in substituted version and the governor's submitted version, there was a substantial decrease in the environmental health fund and the fire, life, and the flame fund. What was the? I'm looking here, and this is close to. It's close to $900,000.
Environmental health fund.
Well, 342, 559, and 526. The difference of. I'm really particularly concerned is actually, you know, what was the explanation for the substantial decrease in both?
The last year there was a subsequent bill to the budget bill that estimated additional increases in the environmental health fund after the budget was passed, which increased the anticipated revenue in the environmental health fund by about 300,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. When we did the tracking, that additional revenue that was anticipated pursuant to an amendment to the environmental health fund did not track in terms of collections. And so BBMR, in then developing the revenue projection this fiscal year, reduced it by that amount of the anticipated increase that did not materialize. But the base is pretty much the same as what was in the original budget bill adopted last year. The flame fund, this is one special fund that I think is going to be substantially above the adopted revenue in this bill, because the fire department had assured us, the administration, that they were going to put out their billing and that they were going to start collecting, and they never did. Well, this year we already do have a vendor. he is on board, and he is, they have provided the training and the software and hardware to actually issue now bills for the use of ambulances. And so we anticipate that that will result in increased collections, but the administration, I guess, didn't want to be as optimistic, so they decided to go very conservative and did this. Just for the information, the initial bills that went out from the vendor now that has been brought on board, I think was about $63,000 was the initial issuance of bills. That's not collections, that's gross billings. But that's only one cycle of bills. So we anticipate that in the new fiscal year, we'll receive quite a bit more than this. But we're with them. We don't want to overestimate on this one again. And that money would still be available then during the fiscal year for us to appropriate.
I guess can I request that in line with the earlier conversation with regards to the mental health billing, that I too believe that there may be a substantial increase based on the new billing structure of the FLAE fund, that any amounts above what was appropriated, there is a provision within the I guess the administrative portion.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So the special fund revenues are, of course, revenues dedicated by departments and agencies, and they're set aside in terms of what the authorized expenditures are of those revenues collected. We have the Airport Air Pollution Control Fund. This goes to Guam EPA, that funds their operations. Autonomous Agency Collections Fund. This is the fund that is supposed to be generated from the payment in lieu of taxes by the autonomous departments and agencies. Last year, the governor had requested or had indicated that he was going to collect some payments from the autonomous agencies. That also did not materialize. And this year, I think he's giving up, and so am I. I'm not helping him. I don't think we want to raise our rates. And so that is zero this year. We will not appropriate money out of that. The Better Public Service Fund, that is the money that is taken out of the licenses and fees, for example. You see up on top there, 507. And then for licenses issued by the Department of Revenue Tax, they get to keep 10%. That goes into their operations and so forth. So we will have 1.39554. Chamorro Land Trust operations will yield about 1,023,000. Some of this is from collection of past due obligations. The Corrections Revolving Fund is 855,661. This is from housing federal prisoners, if I'm correct, at a per diem rate. Customs and Agriculture Quarantine Inspection Services Fund. This is the discussion we had earlier with the Vice Speaker Cruz. As you note, the estimated amount this year is 9,156,099. And yes, and that of that 9 million, then 3,264,296 is reduced because that will be taken by the airport prior to the remittance of any of these collections to the Department of Administration, and that's what they currently keep for rent. So, Senator Guthers, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to E, Corrections Revolving Fund.
Yes.
So the 855,661 is the reimbursement from the federal government, the estimated reimbursement for housing federal prisoners or detainees?
I believe so. I believe so.
Do they pay this in a timely manner? How is this paid?
Yeah. I think we send them an invoice and they send us a payment.
Okay. And when they bill us, I'm just curious, they bill us for the inmates from Guam that are in federal facilities, correct?
Yes, for inmates from Guam that we send to federal facilities,
Okay.
we pay them also.
Do we actually pay them? Have we paid them? Have we identified money to pay them?
We make payments. We are making past due payments.
Okay.
For a while, we actually did not. We owed them several $1 million, and we entered into a payment plan and an MOU. And I think this year, 696
Okay.
is what. That's our annual payment of the past due obligations.
So we include that in the budget?
Yes.
All right.
That's
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're paid off on the past due obligations. We paid that off already, and now our current year obligations for prisoners there now is about 6.9 something. Yeah. Okay. Senator Cruz, did you have any comment? Okay. The E911 or the DPW Building and Design Fund. This is 500,000. Goes to the capital capital project section of the Department of Public Works to help support the engineering services provided and inspection services. Enhanced 911 emergency reporting system, 1.65. That's the dollar per telephone number that is used to support the emergency operating unit up at the Department of Guam Fire Department. Yes, Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, has the committee gotten a clear answer or a clear picture of what exactly is in this fund, in the E911 fund from the administration? The balance of the fund. Were you able to get a clear, because I know there was variations of how much is in there.
Yeah. There was a negative in the fund, but the administration then transferred money into the fund. After issuing the report, they came back with an amended report. There was discussion on exactly what was the balance. There was a deficit in the fund. There was legislation proposed to use the surplus in the fund to fund certain programs, I think fire recruitment. And when they issued us the report, it said there was a deficit, and there was. They subsequently journal vouchered and transferred money into the fund and then issued a new report saying that there is a surplus. So I think the surplus was 1.4 million that they transferred into so that there should be showing a positive balance of 1.4 million.
Okay.
But it was from the general fund, was transferred into the flame fund.
Okay, I'm not, if you can help me understand how that worked, I think it's important for us to understand, I know there was a deficit and then there was a transfer, but how does this work? I mean, how can money just, suddenly be transferred over? And then there's money there.
That's
write it off in a previous audit, and then they reverse that.
The chronology of that is it was the Department of Administration had written off the due to the flame fund. So they said, we're not going to pay that. We're going to write it off. It's going to become a permanent transfer, and we don't owe the flame fund any money. They then subsequently came back and reversed their decision and said, we're going to reverse our decision and we're going to pay it because I believe it was to support the initiative that was being proposed to use the surplus of the fund. When they realized that there is no surplus, then they went back, reversed it to create the surplus.
And so,
so of course that reduced the general fund by 1.4 million.
Okay, so the fund now has 1.4.
Yes.
Okay, and so that's available
for for appropriation.
Appropriation. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. I have Senator Yamashita, Senator Cruz, and then Senator Barnes. Yes.
Thank you very much, Speaker Ben. You know, the concern raised by this fund is even furthered by the fact that 911 needs 911. And now they're housed in Derrida, I understand. And, you know, you have 1.4. I don't understand why the system is in such sad shape. And so, you know, the appropriation is one thing, but the policy that the system is paid for by all of us, when we should be able to call 911 and get the help, you know, needed. So I'm not sure how we ensure that this money is spent for the reason why it's collected. Thank you, Speaker Ben.
Thank you very much. You have Vice Speaker Cruz, Senator Munoz Barnes, and then Senator Gutierrez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was talking to some of the people that handle 911, and I'm trying to find the provision that says that there's not to be carryover. Because it would seem to me that if there was some place that we can amend the law, as the previous speaker had mentioned, the 911 system needs to be upgraded. I mean, replaced. It's so old they don't even have the parts to fix the parts that are falling apart. So it just seemed to me that if they can carry over as opposed to just cheating to the general fund, we would then have funds to be able to pay a vendor or somebody to do this. So if someone can point me to where I can make that amendment, I would like to make that amendment to make sure that there's sufficient funds in the 911 fund going forward and even previously, so that we can try to recapture it and appropriate it or use it for a public-private partnership to do something about that. Because, as the previous speaker put it, at some point, I'm going to need to be pulled out of the house, and I need to know that 911 is going to be able to find where I'm at.
Okay. The public law that created the E901 Emergency Reporting System Fund was Public Law 25-55. So I would start there. 55. Okay. All right. Senator Munoz Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just to add on, the Public Law 25-55 created this fund and created the funding source to come from the telephones. Am I correct?
Correct.
And at that amount, if we can just refresh our memory based on that each account will be deducted, how much?
We generally think that it's every phone number gets charged $1, but not really, because on the landline side, I think it's, if there's every phone number gets done, but if you have a PBX system, it's like up to a max of 10 or 10 lines. So only the first 10 lines get charged $1. Anything after that doesn't get that $1 charge. And then there was a question on the cell phones and the prepaid cards. The 911, those of you that have an interest in this, I would pull up the PUC dockets. There's a lot of discussion under the PUC on reconciliation of the charges, the prepaid issue of what gets charged under prepaid and what doesn't. And so there's a lot of historical information under the PUC on this E911 fund.
Are there reporting requirements based on
Yes.
and has that been up to date, Mr. Chair?
They're supposed to file their reports with PUC.
With PUC, but nothing gets transmitted to the legislature, right?
I'm not sure what additional reports are required out of if there's anything specific out of the legislature. I'm sure that there's an annual audit that, of course, looks at the fund, and then the PUC is the one that's tasked, I think, with reconciling the billing versus the collections by the telephone and telecommunications companies here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I just sort of want to inform my colleagues that, you know, the 911 initiative started in 1993. I'm sorry, 1983, during Governor Berdalio's tenure. And when it started, at that time I was Director of Public Safety, and I worked with GTA to start this program. And when we first started it, it was a series of telephone lines, 911 numbers. It wasn't easy at that time, but we were able to get GTA to configure their system to accept a 3-digit phone system. And we had police officers assigned to answer those phone numbers, those 911 numbers, and to respond accordingly. And of course, later on it changed. But this is 30 years later, Mr. Chairman, and we're still dealing with a system that is not foolproof, that really is not as responsive as it should be. And yet we've had countless contractors since 1983 making money off of this system. And I think that's part of the problem. We need the technical understanding and knowledge in the government of Guam to know what we're buying. Because I think we get fed a lot of stuff under 911 that really may not work for us. And there's got to be someone in this government that knows what we need to buy to have a first-class responsive 911 system. I don't know if we do. And as a result of that, when the contractors come in, they sell us a bill of goods, we procure things, not knowing if the parts will be available later, whether it'll work for us. And another issue, and I think we should look into this, is why is it this new civil defense bunker system where the 911 was located has had failing infrastructure, including their air conditioning system that affects equipment? You know, what's the deal with that and the procurement of the construction of that facility? How did that fail so quickly? Because that was just renovated about a couple years ago.
It's brand new, the tactical.
Yeah, actually that section is brand new. What happened there, and who's looking into that in this government? So I just want to bring those things up because that is a contributing factor to why the 911 system had to move out of that complex. The air conditioning failed. They couldn't breathe in there. Those employees went through hell there. I hope things are a little better now, but now they're dealing with equipment that's failing. So this government has to be accountable in the way we acquire equipment and consultants and contractors for this life-saving 911 system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Guthers. Okay. Any other comments? So the 911, 1.6 million, 50. Environmental health, with our earlier discussion on that, the estimated amount is 687,441. Supports the environmental health division at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. Senator Adam.
Mr. Chairman, that environmental health fund, is that the one, is the source of funding for that the head tax on the H-2 labor? Or is that part of it?
No, there's, that's part of it. It's the environmental health fund created by Public Law 25-120 to account for all fees and penalties collected pursuant to laws enforced by the Division of Environmental Health of the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And I think it was your addition of a bill to have them inspect H-2 barracks or facilities?
Right, but I believe, so I know that for each H-2 laborer that comes in, there's an assessment put on there. I think it was $1,000, and then we added an additional $92. Right. So is that $92?
I think it goes to the environment. I think that one goes to the environmental health also. Yeah, but the original source of fees is sanitary permits, you know, right. and such is what's the major source of revenue for the environmental health fund.
Okay, so do we know then if this 687 includes some of what was ever projected from Department of Labor? Is this, would this be an if it doesn't include that, then this would be an understated figure?
That's correct. Yes. That would be. If they're implementing those inspections at this time, then it should have included this. I'm not sure that they have implemented.
No, I think the two were kind of mutually, it was kind of like the law said that for each H-2 laborer that came in, right. you add an additional $92. And that money goes to the Environmental Health Fund. Okay. And then Department of Public Health was then given the authority to hire to use that money for contractual third-party independent inspectors to go out and help them with the workload. So I mean, deposit of those funds into the environmental health fund was not contingent upon, public health conducting the inspections.
Okay. We'll verify that and see if they have received actually that additional $92.
All right.
And
Thank
if
you.
it's part of this estimate.
Thank you.
Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I've noticed that on the existing FY12 and what we're proposing for 13, there's a variance of about 7%. Do you know why there's that decrease?
Right. The new estimate is based on the revenue tracking developed by, that has been monitored by BBMR. And from the appropriation level last year was 1 million, a little over 1,030,000, somewhere in there. That was the appropriation level based upon the estimates last year. Based upon actual collection experience this year, as of the submission of this budget, and as of the last hearings we've had, they have decided to reduce that to the 687 because the additional anticipated revenues did not materialize. So they've reduced the level. And we'll verify whether or not this 687 or any of the actual collections data used to make this projections included the $92 from the earlier legislation by Senator Adam.
Okay, I'm looking at the committee report, Mr. Chair, just to help me understand. I believe this is page of the committee report. I'm trying to find what page this is. It doesn't say here, but there's a table where it shows the funding request source and amount, the Environmental Health Fund, and that's where we see the 687. And then the next table says funding request by division, and that's where we see the number you just shared with us, the 1.3.
Right, that was last year.
Last year. What if you can just help me understand the funding request source and amount, and then the funding request by division? Okay, so environmental health that's for the whole division, and so just for that fund,
yes.
It's just the 687.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, for that division.
Okay.
From environmental health.
All right. Okay, and my concern there is that we see a decrease when I understand that they had actually revised their fees just earlier this year,
yes,
late last year. And so does that mean that there's less health regulated establishments? So maybe we can just verify where that that decrease is coming from.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The other information that the staff just noted was that the 1,030,000, part of that was the unreserved fund balance. That was the carry forward balance of the environmental health. So that was 123,000. Yeah. So it didn't actually generate the 1 million. 123 was from an unreserved balance in the fund that we allowed them to spend. And then we had the additional, there was an increase in the revenue estimate that was made on the floor, an amendment to increase it to the 1.3. And I think it was based on the increase in their fees. Yeah, so. Okay, any other comments? We've had the discussion on the flame. The GMH Pharmaceutical Fund, again, this is the pass-through from the business privilege tax. This is given over to GMH. Guam Board of Accountancy is 424. These are from testing and renewal of CPA certificates. done by the Board of Accountancy.
Mr. Speaker? Yeah,
Senator Respicio.
just a quick question on the Guam Board of Accountancy Fund. The administration of this fund is status quo?
Yes.
Where they get all the money and then they, okay, that's
correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
The Guam Contractors License Board, these are fees generated by licensing of contractors, 862,450. The Environmental Trust Fund, again from EPA, 331,869. This is given to EPA for their operations. The Guam Highway Fund, the total in the Guam Highway Fund estimate is 18,422,618, liquid fuel tax, diesel tax, etc. Senator Ada?
Mr. Chairman, on these deductions, well, we're reducing, we're debiting against that 18 million.
Correct.
But does this? I know that earlier this year we had passed the bill to use some of these funds to support the UOG and the GCC bonds. Is that coming out of? I forget whether that drawdown was this year or was that in FY2013, FY2014.
FY2014, I believe, is the first year that $1 million would be taken out of the fund.
Okay.
There's a $500,000 direct appropriation out of the fund to the University of Guam, and that's in a miscellaneous appropriation, UOG section.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
All right. And then these are the straight allocation out of the fund. So Better Public Service Fund and the Highway Fund, which is for public transit, of 349, which leaves a total available for appropriation out of the Highway Fund of 17,209,945.
Got it.
Okay. The Guam Plant Inspection and Permit Fund, 85,412. Healthy Futures Fund, this is of course from the tobacco taxes. Alcohol as well, 1,414, 601,601,686. The Indirect Cost Fund, this is the allocation for administrative charges that can be charged against the federal grants. It's an allocation based upon a formula given to us by the Department of Interior. So the allocation or the generated indirect cost fund of 1,826,894. Land Survey Revolving Fund, these are for recording of documents at the Department of Land Management. Oh, Senator Ada, was it on the indirect cost fund or?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just maybe if you can clarify when we refer to a fund as a revolving fund versus, all the other funds here are. So is this to suggest that these funds never lapse, like in the land survey revolving fund? It just is that how we distinguish it when we use the term revolving?
I'm not sure if the term revolving fund is a term of art with regards to fund accounting.
And I raised that question because already, like the Department of Public Works, is requesting that, for example, the DPW Building and Design Fund be a revolving fund. And I would think that the same thing would apply to the Environmental Health Fund.
Okay. We'll have legal counsel research that.
Thank you.
Okay. But I think you're right. I think you're right in your reading of what that term may mean with regards to how the fund is administered. So, okay. So the Land Survey Revolving Fund from, yes, Senator Duenas?
Just a point of information on that, Mr. Chair. I know that when the financing was being put together for the building of the new Department of Land Management building, at least for the purposes of accounting and for qualifying, 1 year by DOA was backed in and put in the account that's now locked of approximately $3.9 million to basically service the loan in the future and to establish that that's how the accounting was at least done for that fiscal year. And so going forward, I believe if the debt service were to be applied upon construction of the building, that would be the way that fund would be managed for the balance of that accounting, so that it could be a standalone fund to support the debt service and the operations of Department of Land Management.
Okay.
But otherwise, it has been treated as a general fund appropriation, and all non-expended funds would be general fund revenues at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. All right. So 3.2 million to 27,764. The Manpower Development Fund estimated to generate 2,111,624. These are from fees for each H-2 visa that is issued by the Department of Labor. The Police Services Fund, 538,858. Professional engineers, architects, land surveyors, 307,282. Again, from the licensing and the certificates of engineers, architects, and land surveyors. Public Recreation Services Fund out of the Department of Parks and Recreation. These are for use of facilities in the public parks, as well as burial stipends, I guess, or just charges, minimal charges for burial services at the public cemetery. 186,098. Public school library resource funds. This comes out of the passport fees that are divided between Department of Revenue and Taxation for the administration of the passport office there, as well as a portion of that goes to the public school system for the enhancement of library resources in the public schools. Public Transit Fund is a allocation of the collection on the diesel fuel to support mass transit on Guam. The Safe Streets Fund, once again, is generating 241,000. This is different from the Safe Streets Fund at the courts, I think. Is this the one from the courts? This is the one, I'm sorry, this is the one for the courts for running some of their programs there. And then you see that we have section 2718 of 7.5 million. This is generated by the rebates from the medical loss ratios of the health insurance contract with the government of Guam. Senator Cruz?
While I'm hopeful that your committee is correct in the amount, I just wanted to state for the record that I have some serious doubts about this, but I'm not going to make any amendments, and I'll take it on faith.
Yes, but this number is not from our committee. This is from the governor's calculator.
Oh, okay. I just didn't want anybody to blame it on my my abacus or my rundown battery.
No, your calculator is broken as far as I'm concerned on this issue. So
Okay.
we're taking the governor's number. This was a number that was adopted by the administration and transmitted to the
Okay,
legislature.
I just wanted to disavow. This was not.
Yeah.
This was the number I used last year, but it is not a number that I would use this year.
Yes. Okay. Then the school lunch, child nutrition meal reimbursement, federal sources. We received from the federal government for a school nutrition program $10,069,218. And then the cash collections from the students at the Department of Education also generate an additional $1,095,091, which gives a total available for school lunch program operations at the Department of Education, Guam Department of Education, of $11,164,309.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking ahead in the budget bill on page 16, and we've always we're tracking, as well as you are, how this food vendor contract is increasing. And in your statement here in the bill, you recognize that the increase is estimated to be 30% greater than the current contract cost of GDOE, and that represents 11.5 million. But yet these two amounts only represent 11.1. I know you're in the bill. There's a statement that they should put this out to bid to ensure that they, through competition, they probably can get a better deal if the current vendor would not want to or the or DOE will not have to absorb this 30% anticipated increase. Now, where would the $400,000 shortfall come from? If we're only appropriating 11.1 million and they're anticipating that the next year's contract will be 11.5 million, would that 400,000 have to come out of DOE's budget?
That's why we're suggesting that it be rebid out so that they can get competition. The school board, I believe, has just increased the lunch cost to the students and this year, so there should be some additional revenue generated. I don't believe it's going to make up for the difference, but
that's not reflected in the $1 million here, the cash collection.
No, right? No.
So can we
the most
bookmark-
recent increase is not reflected in that.
So can we bookmark this and
Sure.
if whatever those anticipated increases are, we put that there so that DOE can get as much money as
Sure.
owed to them?
Okay, we'll try to get an estimate on that.
And then going back to line item 23, if the administration's representing a $7.5 million rebate for the medical loss ratio, this represents a status quo contract amount, and they're saying that the negotiating team is doing a good job to bring this cost down, and I know that the negotiations have been suspended, but if the governor is putting in $7.5 million, then it's basically like the governor of Guam loaning money to this health insurance vendor for the entire fiscal year, and while money's so tight, we're going to have to end up reimbursing ourselves, but that's how I see that number being plugged in, and that's how I see that scenario being played out.
No, I agree with that assessment. Okay. The Solid Waste Operations Fund, estimated to generate $19,939,606. Senator Tomata.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you can maybe clarify. Now, although this is the projected revenue to be brought in from tipping fees, is this actually available for? I guess my question is, how is this appropriated? Because isn't the receiver basically in full control of those funds?
Yes. The Solid Waste Operation Fund, as it's funded from the tipping fees, now pay for the solid waste division at the Department of Public Works. It also pays for the contract for the transfer stations, and it pays for the contract for the operator of the Luzon landfill. So those are the cost centers of the solid waste operations. And then, of course, we have the bond payments from the issuance for the construction of Luzon with a reservation for the closure of Ordot. The receiver goes to the court and ensures that, reports to the court that we're meeting the obligations for the bonds and for the collections. And so they basically, as you mentioned, do control the expenditures out of the fund. And they work with DOA in ensuring and accounting for all of the expenditures to be paid out of the fund. Anything else that I missed on that? So that is, we're hoping that with the impaneling of the Solid Waste Authority, that there becomes a gradual transition at this time between the receiver and the board, so that they can become more involved and basically at some point take over the policy direction as well as for the operations of the fund, and then the court can then divest itself of its oversight over there once they're convinced that the authority is operating in order to meet the consent decree requirements. So.
That's right, and for the record, the board has been fully impaneled,
yeah.
and they are beginning basically the interaction with the receiver to start making that transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Blas.
Mr. Chair, does that take into account the anticipated increase in the fees being charged by solid waste? Does that take into account the anticipated fee increases by solid waste?
Yes, this number was submitted to the committee and to this legislature out of the governor's office as part of his budget. Now, in submitting this number of 19,939,000, this number would be generated provided that there is an increase in the tipping fee. The current collection for the tipping fee is approximately $13 million. About 12 to 13 is the total collections for both commercial and residential tipping fees. The submission of this $19 million number, of course, is contingent, to meet that estimate, is contingent upon a rate increase schedule that was proposed by the receiver. So he gave 2 or 3 options of the increases and how to allocate those between residential and commercial. And of course, when he presents those reports, the governor is represented at each of those hearings, because he is the party involved in the consent decree and the suit. So when the receiver presented this to the court, that this is what's going to be required, and that these are the scenarios for the rate increase, the governor then, in submitting the request, took one of those scenarios and basically submitted them to the legislature. And I'm assuming that in doing that, he fully understands that in order to meet that target, that rate increase has to be petitioned before the PUC for the next fiscal year.
Does that include the debt service? I mean, does it?
Yes, this would include the debt service. Is now a portion of the debt service is paid by the tipping fee, and a portion of the debt service is paid out of the general fund. This year, the tipping fee or the debt service kicks in terms of the full principal and interest payments. In the prior years, we were able to meet our debt service requirement because when we borrowed the money, we capitalized some of the interest. So we borrowed money to pay the interest on the interest. And so the capitalized interest fund has been depleted and now has to be supported by the revenue stream of the collections from the tipping fee, in addition to a portion of the general fund. The general fund has committed to support about a $4 million payment out of the general fund for that portion of the borrowing dedicated to the closure of ORDOT. And the bond covenants were structured, and the bond borrowing was structured such that the portion of the proceeds of the bond dedicated for the closure of ORDOT will not be paid out of tipping fee collections, but will be paid out of the general fund. And so that is the way this is structured. And so that's why an increase is needed, because we're now going to pick up the full principal and interest payment from that portion dedicated for the construction of Lizon. And that number of additional revenue needed to support that principal and interest payment is $7.5 million. And
thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Guthertz?
Mr. Chairman, by approving this figure, are we therefore also approving a rate increase?
By adopting this revenue number that was proposed by the governor, that it will require an increase in the revenue stream or a subsidy out of the general fund.
Out of the general fund?
Section 30.
Yeah.
Yes.
So not an increase in fees to consumers?
If the debt service will be paid, the debt service was guaranteed by the
Okay.
Section 30.
Okay.
So if the increase is not made, the debt service will be paid for by Section 30, and there's has to be a corresponding adjustment in the other operational centers of the government.
What I'm trying to do is sort of make it clear that we are not approving this
No.
legislature a rate increase. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Streetlight Fund, 3.590261. The Tax Collection Enhancement Fund for additional tax enforcement officers and programs at Department of Revenue and Taxation, 686,717. The Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. This is the revenue generated by the imposition of real estate taxes on all property and development on Guam. This is estimated to generate $30,483,566, and this is an increase over the current revenue collections to date. The Tourist Attraction Fund generating estimated $23,168,200 in the next fiscal year. Senator Respicio?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have a couple comments with the TAF. I added up all the appropriations in the back end, and of the $23.1 million projected, are we spending more than $15,643,240?
Yes, the budget that was submitted by Guam Visitors Bureau wanted additional monies to be given for additional marketing of the new market initiatives, as well as the Japan market. And then the other programs funded out of the Tourist Attraction Fund were also still within in the submission of the budget by the governor. And we were able to verify that currently in the Tourist Attraction Fund, there's an unreserved fund balance existing, a surplus basically, and of the total appropriation from the Tourist Attraction Fund contained in this, $2.2 million of the appropriations of the total appropriation will not be from next year's collections. They're from the $2.2 million is from the unreserved fund balance of the Tourist Attraction Fund today.
But I'm seeing that there's a $7.5 million that's not appropriated from the $23 million that's being projected here. I added up the appropriations.
Oh, because that's for the debt for the bond.
Yeah. So then there would be $2.2 million
in unreserved fund balance appropriations.
Okay. How about the 15% reserve that the administration's withholding from the TAF? By what authority does
that would add to the unreserved fund balance? If they actually withhold that money, that would increase the unreserved fund balance. But we from the audits and the financial statements of the Guam Visitors Bureau, we've confirmed that there's at least a $2.2 million unreserved fund balance that has not been appropriated out of the TAF. And we're using that this year to increase, continue funding some of the programs and to increase funding for marketing.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
The Water Protection Fund generates $66,461, and this goes to the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. And then the Water Research and Development. I'm sorry, Senator Ada, did you have any hand?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Where does the Water Protection Fund come from?
I think these are the well permits. If I'm not mistaken, let me just verify. Water Protection Fund created by Public Law 22-47 to provide funding for the administration and implementation and enforcement of Water Pollution Control Act and regulations promulgated from the Act for educational programs and grants for research and development, advertising, promotions, and inspections of facilities to prevent or minimize erosion that contributes to the pollution of waters. So I think that, if I'm not mistaken, this is generated from well permit fees and inspection fees. I'll have to verify that, but that's my recollection.
All right, thank you.
Um, and so the Water Research and Development Fund is 73,000, which gives us a total special fund revenue available of 161,054,950. Just to go back, revolving funds under 5 GCA. I just wanted to specify it in statutes. The governor may, when he deems it necessary and proper, create, establish, and continue from appropriated funds or service fees, revolving or other special funds to be used in providing services and in maintaining such activities of the government as the purchase and sale of seed by the Department of Agriculture, purchase of books by the Department of Education. Such revolving or other special funds, if and when created and established, shall be maintained separate and apart from any other funds of the Government of Guam, and independent records and accounts shall be maintained in connection therewith as prescribed by the Director of Administration. All monies received from such activities shall be deposited in the appropriate revolving fund or other special funds, and all debts, liabilities, obligations, and operating expenses in connection with such activities shall be paid therefrom. The Director of the Department or such other officer who has cognizance and jurisdiction over such revolving or other special funds established provided herein shall monthly render to the Governor a statement reflecting the financial condition of the fund or funds under his jurisdiction. The Department of Administration shall periodically audit the accounts and records of such revolving or other special funds and render a report thereon to the Governor. So it's, I guess a revolving fund is basically just a special fund, but it allows so it's just, I don't think it makes that big of a difference in terms of what it's titled. It's kind of almost used interchangeably here. Senator Blas?
But I guess then the question needs to be posed. What happens to the monies that are not used in the fund? And if they collect in excess?
They remain available for appropriation or expenditure pursuant to the authorities granted for what can be paid out of those funds. We also have general language in almost all budget bills that funds not expended in certain special funds revert to the fund. Funds not expended or encumbered at the end of the fiscal year kind of go right back into the fund and remain available.
Is there an accounting of where those funds are at today? All of those? I mean,
yeah. So, Senator Respicia.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, along those lines, there should also be some accountability with how those funds are being administered. Can we have a printout of what the bank balance is versus the cash balance? Because take for the case of the recycling revolving fund, we know that the administration has taken at the time at least $5 million from that fund,
right.
And the mayors and Senator Barnes is trying to explain to them and articulate that the mayor should not be upset with the legislature for that. It should be the administration,
yes.
really.
Absolutely.
And so I just sent an email to Administrator Palacios also asking what the bank balance ought to be versus the actual cash. But are you able to generate that?
Not at this time,
Yeah.
but one of the provisions we have in the administrative provisions of the bill
I saw
here,
that.
we would have OFB would be able to get some read-only access to the balances of the accounts that are available for online banking, so that we can actually just go in and take a look at what the balance is. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the other thing is, of course, is that whenever the legislature addresses these funds, there's the general rule is that at the end of the fiscal year, all unencumbered, unexpended balances of the funds revert to the funds. But many times the legislature will put, notwithstanding that appropriation shall continue until fully expended, and which affects the status of the funds and so forth. So it's, yes, Senator Barnes, did you have your hand up earlier? Yeah, I'm sorry, Senator Rodriguez, I did see her.
I guess just along those lines, the resources that are not expended doesn't get carried over, or carried over, carried over and used for upcoming. It'd have to be reappropriated by this body, or could that agency director use the unexpended fund that was collected that year?
Only if we authorize it.
Oh,
Right.
So yeah, only if we,
Yes,
as policymakers, authorize that.
yes. And we're pretty good at doing that. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, so this reflects all the special funds, right,
Yes.
of the government.
Correct.
Are there others out there that maybe are not, there's like one with the cosmetology fund, and there's always been a big contention about, what's in it and how it's being spent. And so I don't see that here. And then also the other is we've established two other funds that I know of, which is the Vital Statistics Revolving Fund.
No.
Earlier this
that's
year.
New, though. That's just this year, right?
Yes.
That's right. Okay.
So does that mean because it's not established yet, then,
no,
we're not?
no. I mean, that was established this fiscal year. They should have. They probably
Okay, there's two.
slipped by them.
There's that, and then there's also the other one, Alcoholic Beverage Compliance Fee and Fines Fund, that was also established earlier, Public Law 31-199. So these are two that.
We'll inquire with BBMR
Okay.
and DOA what's the status of those.
Okay, because I know, like with the Alcoholic Beverage Compliance Fee and fines, is, how they have that they have this Operation Dragon, I believe, that fines businesses. The intent of this fund is for those funds to be, the fines to be deposited into this fund to help with the that's right, with enforcement. So if we can check
All right,
those
we'll
two.
check with BBMR and DOA on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? I would like at this time to entertain a motion to recess until 2.
So move, Mr. Speaker.
All right. On the motion to recess until 2, no objections. Committee of the Whole is in recess. Thank you, and Sidus Masi, ladies and gentlemen.